Hi folks, Andy here from MonkeeTech again, and we're looking at ERhops and ERhops today. What's the difference between the two and why you should be using them? In my opinion, ERhops are probably the #1 priority you want to be doing on your airsoft gun for range and accuracy. There's a bit of a myth actually on the airsoft scene that if you have a tight bore barrel, that automatically gives you far better range and accuracy. That might be true a little bit for the accuracy. I mean, you won't be hitting a 10p off a tree branch at 50 meters, but it will give you slightly tighter groupings. In terms of range though, really tight bore isn't designed for range, it is designed for accuracy. So if you're using a CQB weapon in a CQB environment, then you want to be using tight bore. But if you're wanting something a bit more outdoors, a bit more woodland and long range, then actually I would say going wide bore is probably a better option. Personally, I use 6.08 millimeters. Some people use 6.05 millimeters. Some people even wider than that. So it's your choice really. I'd say avoid 6.01 millimeter. They're a bit too tight. You might find jams. You might find BBs kind of like lodging where they shouldn't lodge and having to clear them all the time. 6.03 millimeter are okay, but generally speaking 605 or 608 is where you want to go. So I'm going to just take you through the processes of what happens normally with a default airsoft gun that you've got without the ERhop process, and we'll tell you why ERhop is better. So what we've got here is the inner barrel and the window end of the inner barrel, and this is going to be the end that's going to be locked into your hop unit, and obviously you can have the nozzle behind that and the gearbox behind that. So what's going to be happening is the BB will be being fed by your magazine, and that will be going up into the chamber. The nozzle will be pushing it slightly forwards, and then you'll get a gush of air that's going to be pushing that through into the barrel like so. So the BB is going to be traveling and going past that window. So where that window is, there's going to be a very small nub. Now this is actually inside out, so this nub here would actually be inside the hop rubber, and it would be pushing down inside this little bit here. So imagine that nub that's pushing down inside there. Now there's lots of different kinds of hot rubber that you can get. Some of them have a completely flat edge, known as flat rubbers. You can also get ones that are kind of bumped. Some of them have H shapes, some of them have kind of grooves in them. This particular one has got a triangle shape here. So I think what it is, lots of different brands try out different methods, and different people get different results. It's very much a trial and error thing. So the idea is, so if you imagine that bump is on the inside, the BB is going to be traveling along, and it's going to be hitting that, and it's going to be having a backspin put on it by that triangular shape here. So it's the backspin of the nub or whatever it is that's keeping the BB in the air. It's backspin that fights gravity. The more backspin you have, the longer range you get, because it's fighting gravity essentially. So the idea with ERhop is you want to be putting as much of pressure of a patch down onto the BB as possible. The more pressure that's put down, the more range you're going to get, because there's going to be a greater backspin. So for instance, when you've got your hop setting on 0, the reason why you get a BB going like that and it's just going down is because there is no backspin. It's pushing along and there's no backspin, so it just drops. As soon as you introduce a little bit of pressure, that starts putting backspin on. The greater the backspin, the longer it stays in the air. So in terms of the types of BBs to use, it really depends on what you're going to be using the gun for and how it's set up. So if you've got ERhop, you want to be using 0.3 gram BBs. The reason for that is because of the surface pressure being pushed down by the ERhop, and because the patch is bigger, it's going to be giving more of an upspin. It's going to be more of a trajectory upwards. To counteract that, you want to be using a heavier BB, so something like 0.3 is ideal. 0.28 is okay, 0.2 forget, 0.25 kind of not particularly good results. I find 0.3 is perfect. Now that's for AEG, that's if you're doing full auto in a woodland game or whatever. If you want to go DMR, which is designated marksman rifle, and you want even longer range because you might have a higher FPS, something like 450 FPS single shot, you want to be doing something what's known as ERhop. Now E stands for extended. So the process of ERhop is essentially creating a little patch like this little blue patch made out of silicon that is going to fit inside here. That is essentially what ERhop is. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking off this nub here. So this little bump, little triangular bump here, we want that to be flat, because otherwise what's going to happen if that stays put on there is that it's going to be pushing the triangle and the patch at the same time, and it's going to be a huge great pressure downwards, and it's going to jam essentially. So we want the bump off and we want the patch like that. So this is what your ERhop patch will be looking like. It's quite rough cut at the moment, so I haven't by any means kind of refined it at the moment. It's just kind of rough cut to show you. But the silicone patch should be covering the entirety of the window. It shouldn't be too big and it shouldn't be too shallow. It should be almost exactly matching the shape of the inner barrel. So what's going to be happening, imagine this is covered in rubber, and we're going to imagine that the yellow nub on the rubber has been smoothed down, so it's nice and flat. The BB is going to be going through there, and as that goes through there, the nozzle will be giving a burst of air to shove it through there, and the lever arm will be pushing down, and this blue patch will be pushed down onto the BB. Obviously once it's set and static, the BB will hit it and there'll be a huge amount of backspin on it, and it will be going for a long distance. That is what gives you the range. Just going to show you the lever arm here. So the lever arm needs to be flat. When you get a lever arm with your hop unit, there's usually sort of like a C clamp that has another little kind of rubber tube or little rubber bit in it that gives an extra little bit of push down. What you want to do is you want to file that down, you want to smooth that down so it's nice and flat. The idea being that you want to be building up, instead of having like a small area that's pushing down that's attached to the lever arm, you want to be having like strips of rubber. I personally use like little latex sheets that you can get from eBay. So what you want to be doing is buying sheets of rubber, maybe kind of a millimeter, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters thick, sometimes even 0.5 millimeters, just to give you that little extra tweak. And you want to be stacking those up, and you want to be putting those into the area where the lever arm is. So where you've got the lever arm here, you want to be stacking up the latex layers. I found many different types of materials. Some people use a razor rubber, some people use kind of PVC type rubber, some people use silicone. I personally use latex sheets kind of built up together. That gives the best. I used to use sorbothane rubber, 50 density. You can get different densities of sorbo rubber. I used to use 50. That's too squishy, it's too soft. What I was finding is that when you fire the BBs, they'd be okay for a while, but then the softness of the rubber would kind of return back to shape, and then you'd have to reset the hop unit and do that again and again. If your rubber is too hard, if you're using kind of very hard rubber, that is going to cause problems as well. That will make it jam. And with ERhop, it's very sensitive. You want to be doing a click at a time. So basically you want to be doing shoot, click, shoot, click, shoot, click, in terms of finding the sweet spot. Usually people fire it from going down, from the BBs going down until they're going slightly up, and you've got a very slight kind of ascending trajectory. You then want to be kind of like clicking that back just a little bit, just so you get it straight. And once you've got that sweet spot, leave it there. If the rubber's too soft, then you're going to have to keep resetting your hop unit, and if it's too hard, the BBs will jam. So personally, I use latex sheets. Right, so what we're looking at here is a hop unit with the window cut out of it. So the difference between ERhop and ERhop. ERhop would only refer to this little blue bit here, and the hop window only being that size, which would give you enough of a backspin for something like AEG. If you want to do something like DMR, which is designated marksman rifle, and you want far longer range, then this blue patch needs to be extended all the way down here. So what I've done with this particular hop unit is I've already cut out and extended the window of the hop unit. So now what I need to do, I need to extend the window of the inner barrel as well, and create a new patch that's longer and covers the full length of that. What you can see here at the moment is without the hop rubber. So when it's put together, the hop rubber will be put over it. Obviously the nub would be removed, the inner bump would be removed, and where we're going to be putting those slithers of rubber, like I mentioned before, we're going to be matching those to this shape here. So you'd have rubber layers matching this shape here, you'd have a blue patch also matching this shape here. It's all got to be combined really, so all of the shapes have got to match. So bear with me and I will just cut into this barrel and we'll see how we get on. Okay, so what we have here is probably the trickiest part of ERhop, which is getting that window just right. What we've got here is the normal window of a normal inner barrel would come to about there, so that little area there. We've actually extended it, okay, so it's about double the length now. That's why it's called ERhop, extended RHop. This is what it means. So you've got far more surface area going down on the BB. So if you've got a 0.4 BB here and it's going through like this, it's going through, and as it's being fired, it's got that length, of patch coming down on it, so that would be in there, and that's going to give you huge range. With these, sometimes you can outrange snipers. Now, as this is going in like so, you want it to be really quite loose. It needs to, as you can see, back and forwards, nice and loose, no problem. If you do your ERhop and it's getting jammed in some way, you're just going to have to sand it back. You must do that, otherwise you're going to get all sorts of jamming issues and even trajectory issues. RHop and ERhop is very hard to do. It's difficult to get right. It's taken me quite a few years to get it right. Ideally you'd want something like a laser cutter to cut this out. As you can see, it's still slightly rough, but it's okay. It's about as level and it's about as straight as I can get it. It's going to appear slightly more rough because it's a close-up on the camera here, but it's okay. It's okay. I might kind of try and smooth it a little bit better, but what I tend to use is either a Dremel grinder to kind of like get the initial metal out of the way, the initial metal parts, and then I use something like a sander or a file to smooth it down even further. It's a constant battle really. You're fighting against nicks and burrs, you're fighting against little sharp shards, very tiny sharp shards. Sometimes you might want to use a craft knife as well, so one of these to kind of like scrape away the bits. It's definitely a skill. It's definitely an art rather than a science. It would be a science if you just put it in a machine and get a laser cutter and just kind of like program it to cut it beautifully smoothly, which I'm sure some people can do. But other than that, I haven't got one of those, so I'm relying on Dremel, I'm relying on file, and I'm relying on sandpaper and craft knife. That's how I do mine. It's okay. It's not bad. And I've done plenty of these, and as you see on the MonkeeTech Facebook page, the reviews I get pretty good results. Some people are super perfectionists, and that's fine and that's great, and I try and be a perfectionist myself, but I haven't got, you know, 0.00 millimeter precision in what I do because I haven't got a laser cutter and a microscope. But this should give some pretty good results. You'll see also that there's some copper tape around it. The reason I do that is to give it better air seal. As the rubber goes over there, and obviously put the patch in first, and then that slides into the hop unit that way around. As it slides in, without the copper tape, you might not get a particularly good air seal. You may be lucky and it may be fine, but then I have found with some hop units and some rubbers they're not that good, and you can get air escaping. Especially important for DMR. If it's a 450 FPS, you want to be really tightening that air seal up as much as possible. Some people use electrical tape. I'm not a fan of it. It can degrade quite quickly, and it can have problems. It can deform slightly. Some people use what's known as PTFE tape, kind of plumber's tape. Again, that can deform and that can cause problems. What I tend to do is use copper because it stays put. Once it's stuck, it stays put and offers a really good seal. Okay, so what we've got here is the patch, and what you'll notice here is where these edges are, these little inside edges, you just want to sand those back a little bit. You just want to kind of, you'll see the difference between them. There's like a dull finish and there's a kind of shiny finish. That dull finish is where it's been sanded down. So what you're going to be doing, if I put it that way around, as the BB is going in, it doesn't want to be hitting that a hard edge on the inside, because that could actually fold up the patch and it could get jammed. So it's just been sanded a little bit, so you've got more of an angle, so the BB is coming along and it's going in nicely and it's going out nicely. And that should really help you as well. So what I've done as well, I've sanded the inside of that, so if you have a look at that, there's no nub now on the inside, that's completely flat. Okay, so what you've got here is basically the inner barrel now with ERhop. So where this hop unit window is cut out for ERhop, we've now got a blue ERhop patch filling the whole of that window now. So that's going to give a hell of a lot of pressure down on the BB. Now for ERhops, what you want to be doing is using 0.4 or above BBs. So now that it's got even more pressure pushing down, there's going to be even more of an upward trajectory with it. So to compensate that, it needs to be heavier. So for this, we want to be using 0.4 gram BBs. Not really applicable for AEGs, but it is applicable for DMRs, which is what this is. This is what I was talking about in terms of the rubbers. So what we've got here is a sorbethane rubber patch, and that would go in there, and there's another blue one which is made out of latex, which is this one here. So here we are, here's our ERhop patch, and that is going to go into there like so. Now I did say earlier that sorbethane patches, I used to use them and they were too soft and too squishy. Basically I used to use kind of, I'd say 5mm or 6mm, quite thick sorbethane patches, which were 50D, which stands for density. I found those were too squishy, and what you do, you'd set your hop unit, you'd fire, be okay for a bit, but then it would kind of, the rubber would start to deform. So what I do now is I use much thinner sorbethane. So this is kind of I think it's still 50D, 50 density, but it's much thinner, and then instead of the rest of them being sorbethane patches, I would use these, which is just normal latex rubber, which is just hard enough and just soft enough to do what it needs to do. If it's too soft, it will deform. If it's too hard, it will jam the BB. So a combination of sorbethane rubber and latex built up. You'd have to work out how you would do that in terms of layering. So the more layers that you have, obviously the thicker it's going to be. Ideally what you want to be doing is when the inner barrel and the hop unit is obviously out of the gun and you're testing it, you're going to be looking down the inner barrel and you're going to be looking at a source of light, not the sun by the way. The sky would do perfectly, and you want it on 0 setting first of all, and for there to be 0 pushing down of the nub. You don't want to see any kind of light pushing down of the nub. As you click it and click it and click it, you want it to be getting slightly more of a C shape, kind of like protruding down. If it's got too much of a push down on that C shape, then it's going to start jamming BBs. If you haven't put enough layering in and it's not doing anything at all, so you're clicking and it's just doing nothing, then the BBs are just going to fall flat. So it's a bit of a tricky thing, but it is possible. So another thing I tend to do is where you see the end of the barrel here, there's a slight differentiation, maybe about 2mm, where it goes in and then it's kind of black. What that's going on is there's a slight tapered edge, a slight kind of like angle going in. The idea is when the BB is exiting the end of the barrel, it's being followed by a cushion of air that's fanning out in kind of like a cone shape. The idea is that it cushions the BB stays more stable and has a better trajectory. So this area here has got a few names. It could be called crowning, it could be called tapering, it could be called a beveled edge. Any of those things would be relevant. I personally use the term crowning. That's how I kind of use it as. So this area here is probably about 2mm, I'd say, of crowning. Personally, I tend to do a modification where you make it deeper. So you go in further, you do what's known as reaming. So you have a special tool that's a reamer, and a mixture of that with sandpaper as well. It is a little bit tricky. It takes a fair amount of time to get right. You don't want any nicks or burrs, you don't want any kind of sharp shards, anything that basically where the BB hits it will put it off track. The trajectory will go all over the place, so you want it to be as smooth as you possibly can. So what I'm going to do to this barrel in a moment is I'm going to turn that 2mm gap, and you'll notice the thickness of the edge of the barrel as well. The actual perimeter thickness is probably about 1mm, I'd say. I'm going to make that a lot thinner because I'm going to go deeper with the reamer. What that's going to do is give more of a cone. It's going to give a greater cone of air as the BB is exiting. So what we have here is the freshly crowned inner barrel. So this has got a new crowning job on it. As you can see, looking down into it, the walls of the inner barrel are a lot thinner, and this is because I've gone a lot deeper with the tapering and the crowning, and I would say that the actual tapering goes down to maybe about there. So it's quite a deep crowning job. Again, using a reamer, it takes quite a bit of skill and a bit of time. You'd have to kind of like scrape it out quite carefully, and then use a sander to basically smooth it down so there's no nicks or burrs or anything. So that should give a lot more stabilization. There's going to be a greater cushion of air pushing the BB out into a nice big cone shape, and that will give good stabilization and good trajectory. So that's another modification I would advise. It's tricky, you can do it yourself, but I also do it at MonkeeTech, so if you want to give me a message to do with that, I'm quite welcome to take orders for crownings. Okay, so here's the assembled hop unit. It's actually for an HK417D, a DMR, and what I've done here is I've actually used like a little metal kind of clamp thing, a little metal strip that's got a 90-degree angle that just holds the rubber nicely in place. And because the hop unit usually would end its nub there, it needs a little bit of extra support just to give it some strength. If I turn it this way, you might be able to see what I'm going on about. So this little bit here is a clamp that's at an angle, and we're actually using white rubber here, so I found some thick white rubber that I thought was appropriate to use. Underneath that is like a thin layer of sorbo, and what that is doing, that metal support, is just giving it some more support to push downwards. Without that, if it didn't have that, it might push a little bit too far at the rear and not enough forwards pressure. So that little metal bit is hopefully giving it a little bit more forward pressure. How you would do that in an M4 hop unit, for instance, where you've got the hop arm, again you would kind of level it off. You would get rid of the C clamp that's kind of pushing the nub down. You'd flatten that off. You'd use layering rubber, as I mentioned previously, and what you might want to do with the lever arm is extend it a little bit. You can get extended lever arms. Shapeways do them, for instance, for extended ER hops, but you can actually make your own. So what you can do with the lever arm is drill into it and then get a small screw. It's very fiddly, it's very annoying, you'd need to know what you're doing, but screw into the lever arm at the end. Sometimes you can use JB Weld, which is kind of like a hardening solution, to put it on the end. Harden that, and then you kind of like shape it and scrape it, cut it so it's a nice smooth edge. And that's a possible way of extending the lever arm. If you don't extend the lever arm, so for instance the lever arm on this one ends where that black bit is there, it could put too much pressure on the back and not enough pressure at the front, and that will be kind of a waste of an ER hop basically. So hopefully this will give good results. I have looked through the inner barrel towards the light, and it's pretty good actually. It's got a nice shape. You want to be looking for a C shape, you want to be looking for a shape like that that's pushing down into the inner barrel, because that's what's going to be giving the surface area for the BB that's flying into it. So I hope this has been useful and helpful, and if there's any questions, please let me know. Any comments, I might have missed stuff out, so let me know. If anyone's got a different way of doing it, I'm quite happy to listen to that as well. Always listening to new ideas. It's an evolving thing, it's a learning curve always. I don't know it all. I always state that I don't know it all. It's a constant learning curve. So I hope this has helped people, and please subscribe and spread the word. Thanks. Bye bye.